In 1294, the Mongol rulers of Persia printed money from thin air. Within 60 days, an empire that had conquered everything from Baghdad to the borders of India watched its economy completely disintegrate. This is history's first forced currency experiment, and its spectacular failure. The Ilkhanate was supposed to be invincible. These were the Mongols who had sacked Baghdad, drowned the last Abbasid caliph, and built an empire stretching from Afghanistan to Turkey. By 1290, they controlled the richest trade routes on earth. Silk, spices, and silver flowed through their cities. But here's what nobody expected: the same warriors who crushed every army they faced would be brought to their knees, not by swords, but by paper. Their treasury was hemorrhaging silver. Wars against rival Mongol khanates had drained their reserves. And one minister believed he had discovered the solution in Chinese innovations. What happened next would become the ancient world's greatest economic catastrophe. But why would anyone think paper could replace precious metal? The answer lay 2,000 miles east. In China, the Yuan dynasty, cousins of the Ilkhanate rulers, had been using paper money for decades. And it worked. Kublai Khan's empire ran on printed currency backed by imperial decree. Merchants accepted it. Taxes flowed. The economy functioned. Pause, but here's what the Ilkhanate minister missed. Chinese paper money succeeded because of three crucial factors: centuries of gradual adoption, massive silver reserves backing the currency, and brutal enforcement across a unified empire. Persia had none of these. The minister who championed this idea was named Sadr al-Din Zanjani. He had risen to become the most powerful financial official in the realm. And he convinced Ilkhanate Khan, a ruler more interested in pleasure than policy, that paper would solve everything. If you're already seeing the disaster coming, drop a like. Now let me put you in the shoes of a Persian merchant in 1294. Pause, you've spent your life trading in silver dirhams. Your grandfather did. His grandfather did. One morning, a royal herald arrives at the Tabriz bazaar. All silver and gold coins are hereby illegal. You must exchange them for paper called chow. The government promises these papers equal your coins in value. But here's the twist nobody talks about. The exchange wasn't equal. Officials confiscated precious metals and issued paper worth far less. Merchants weren't just adopting new currency, they were being robbed in broad daylight with imperial approval. And anyone who refused, the punishment was death. Imagine holding generations of family wealth in your hands and watching it become worthless paper overnight. What would you do? The response was immediate and devastating. Merchants didn't riot. They didn't rebel. They did something far more destructive to an empire built on trade. They simply stopped. Shops closed. Caravans halted. The legendary bazaars of Tabriz, which had operated for centuries through invasions and earthquakes, fell silent. Persian historian Rashid al-Din, who witnessed these events firsthand, wrote that the markets became like graveyards. No grain. No meat. No cloth. Within weeks, people began starving. Not because food didn't exist, but because no one would sell it for paper. Think about that. The Mongols had survived brutal winters, crossed deserts, conquered fortified cities. But they couldn't force merchants to believe in worthless currency. And this is where everything changed. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. Pause, the paper money experiment lasted exactly 2 months. 60 days to destroy what centuries of conquest had built. Ilkhanate Khan, finally recognizing the catastrophe, reversed the decree. The chow was abandoned. Silver and gold returned. But the damage was permanent. The minister Sadr al-Din Zanjani, the architect of this disaster, was executed. His punishment? Being force-fed strips of his own worthless paper money until he choked to death. If you want to see how this empire never recovered, subscribe now. Because the economic wounds from these 60 days would bleed for generations. Trade routes that had enriched Persia for millennia shifted permanently. Merchants who survived never forgot. And the Ilkhanate itself would collapse within 40 years. The Ilkhanate's paper money disaster reveals something profound about power. These Mongol rulers commanded the largest land empire in history. Their armies were undefeated. Their word was law from the Mediterranean to the Himalayas. Pause, and none of that mattered. You cannot force people to believe. You cannot decree trust into existence. The Chow failed because currency isn't just metal or paper, it's collective faith. When Gaikidu Khan commanded his subjects to accept worthless paper, he discovered the one thing even Mongol swords couldn't conquer: human nature. Merchants would rather starve than participate in obvious theft. Farmers would rather let crops rot than trade sustenance for fiction. What happened next sealed their fate forever. The Ilkhanate limped on for 4 more decades after the Chow disaster. But historians mark 1294 as the beginning of the end. Trust, once broken, never fully returned. The economic networks that made Persian cities wealthy began routing through competitors. Within a generation, the descendants of world conquerors were fighting over scraps. In 1335, the last Ilkhan died without an heir. The empire fragmented into warring factions. The throne that had commanded millions became meaningless. And in the ruins of Tabriz, elderly merchants still told their grandchildren about the 60 days when paper swallowed silver, and an empire choked on its own arrogance. This was history's warning about forced currency. 700 years later, we're still learning the same lesson. The Ilkhanate's paper money experiment wasn't just a medieval curiosity. It was humanity's first large-scale test of fiat currency, money backed only by government decree. And the results were catastrophic. Economists still study this collapse to understand the psychology of monetary systems. What makes people trust currency? Why do some experiments succeed and others fail spectacularly? The Mongols learned through 60